on it. So
Yeah. Yeah, because it goes, it's
are we streaming live now?
It's still setting up.
Oh, because it says live on Facebook right now.
Oh, does it? It doesn't.
Uh-huh. Hey guys. Hi. If we're there. It's nice to see you.
I know. It's because my computer is crazy. Oh well.
It's okay. It's more fun that way. Yeah, no, we're definitely live. I can see us. See right there. There we are.
It won't update and let me see it. Dang it.
Well, you know what? Listen, we're there, so let's just go with it. Guys, welcome to Real Estate Investing Rocks. My name is Jeffrey Holst. This is Angel. Angel. Geez, I'm terrible. I apologize. Angel Williams, and it's her show, so I'll let her tell you about her. How's that for me introducing myself?
Yeah, so let me get back over here. My name is Angel, and we've been investing since 2003. We've got 3 single-family homes, a quad, a couple of duplexes, and we are passive in 4 syndications. So that's how we got into this. I was a teacher. I resigned in February, but in keeping with my educator heart, we created this educational platform, which is the Academy Presents Real Estate Investing Rocks, and we cover all things real estate. So if you have any questions or you ever want me to try and find someone that is an expert in that particular niche or field, let me know, and I will do my best to track someone down. Actually, I will track someone down, get them on the show, and let them help you learn. So this is Jeff, and he was is a lawyer, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about kind of his life story, like being super successful and then hitting the bottom of it, and then coming back and being really successful again. And so I think that's going to help a lot of people really be able to see that failures are okay. And it's more of getting back up, dusting yourself off, and just making that forward motion again. So picking up that inertia and getting going again. So Jeff, if you can give us your story.
Sure, absolutely. So, well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and sorry to mess up the beginning of your show there. That's probably my fault, not yours. So anyway, I appreciate it, and it's really great to be here. So like she was saying, my plan is to tell you a little bit about my story. So I'm going to do this in kind of I didn't even warn our illustrious host here, so hopefully she is okay with it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out and I'm going to talk not about real estate. We're going to talk about my life, which is what she just alluded to. And then at the end, if we still have a little bit of time, I'm going to talk about a couple of real estate things that I think are really important for people right now. And that will be it. So that's what we're going to do. So hopefully you get real value from what I'm sharing with you today. And I look forward to doing that. So anything else from you, Angel, or are we ready to go?
We are ready to go.
Okay, cool. If anything I say sounds confusing or it doesn't make any sense, feel free to interrupt me because you're here to do that. But I'm going to jump off of camera right now, and we will be taking a look at some of my slides. I promise I won't go anywhere, but this way we can, do things like dance in the background and no one will know, right? So it'll be more fun for us that way anyway. That's my theory. So anyway, so hopefully if everything went as planned, you're now seeing the logo of my real estate show. So I think that Angel invited me today because she heard about the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show. And if that's the case, then that's awesome. If not, then, whatever. It doesn't matter, right? So anyway, so let me tell you a little bit about my life story. So the thing about my life story is that I started out, like everyone else, kind of and I'm having a little trouble with my slides, so I apologize. 1 second here. There we go. All right, good. All right, so this is kind of where I was before I got into real estate. So I have a master's degree in business, and I have my law degree. I had my 3 dogs, the dream house in the suburbs. I was pretty well traveled. I'd been to 48 states, Europe, Middle East, South America, all that stuff. But I had a lot of other things going on. I was a lawyer, bankruptcy attorney, so I did a lot of bankruptcies, actually. 2007 is when I graduated law school. So 2008, 9, and 10 was crazy busy in the bankruptcy realm. We had a television commercial, which if you guys get really bored, you can Google. It's called Meet Mary and Bankruptcy and Holst. If you do Meet Mary, Bankruptcy, Holst, you'll find it. and this commercial was ridiculous, but we had this idea where we were going to be the next big bankruptcy firm in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And so we were pushing that out. But the thing I think that was most important to me at that time, and remains one of the most important things to me today, is that I never have bad days. So I'm going to start and tell you a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people really don't understand what I mean when I say that. I mean, on the surface, it seems like sort of, obvious, if you say you never have bad days, it means you never have bad days. But I usually get like, I don't know, one of like 3 different responses. I'll say to someone, like, I might be in a gas station and I'll say, they'll say, how you doing today? And I'll say, oh, great. I never have bad days. And they'll say something like, well, that must be nice. Right. Or they'll say something like, I wish. Right. Or they'll say, like, I don't believe you. Those are the 3 responses that I kind of get to the I never have bad days. And I think Angel might be on that last one where she doesn't believe me because she's laughing at me right now. So,
well, no, I'm kind of laughing. I found the commercial.
Oh, you found the commercial. Yeah, it's really great. I mean, feel free to share it if you want. I mean, we got nothing going on. I mean, if you want to share it, I mean, we can watch it. But,
well, I found it on my phone.
Yeah, well, I guess we can't share it right now then. But anyway, yeah, so the commercial is really funny. And, it was kind of over the top ridiculous, which is sort of how I like to live my life, is over the top ridiculous. But so what happened was when I was 17, I was having, normal teenage angst kind of bad days. And I said, to myself, I don't want to have a bad day today. I don't know what changed that particular day. I was going through something with my girlfriend at the time or whatever, but I was just like, man, I'm young and healthy and I live in America. It could be a lot worse. And so I just said, today's a good day. And I promptly went out and had another bad day. But because I'm really persistent, I just kept telling myself today's a good day every day, all day long for like several months. And then one day I was in a convenience store and someone said to me, how you doing today? And I literally said, without thinking about it, I never have bad days. And I realized, I hadn't had a bad day in a few months. And I haven't had a bad day since. So that was when I was 17. Now I'm, let's just say I'm over 17. And, so like 25 years now without any bad days. Anyway, so that's kind of where I was. I was 30 years old. It's August of 2008. I had already been to Egypt and to Petra and to Machu Picchu. And there's a picture of my wife in the bottom right-hand corner and I swimming in the Amazon River. Funny story about that. That was right after we went piranha fishing.
I was going to say, aren't the piranhas in that?
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, what are you thinking, right? Well, we went piranha fishing on like a side stream and we got out to the middle of the river and they're like, do you want to go swimming? And it was stupid hot out, right? I mean, it was just crazy, crazy hot. So we're like, yes, but piranhas. And they're like, oh, don't worry about the piranhas. They don't come out in the middle of the river where there's a lot of current. They like to hang out along the banks. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? So we jump in, we went for a swim and all this stuff. And I wasn't even going to tell the story, but I feel like it's relevant now. Then later that night, we went on this caiman spotting trip where caiman are like a dwarf crocodile, right? They're like 2-3 feet. They live in the river, freshwater crocodiles. And they swim around in there. And so we're on this spotting trip and like, of course we didn't think about caiman when we were worried about the piranhas, right? So I'm watching like, the sides and you're shining a flashlight or like a bright light at the shore and you see their eyes and then they kind of pop out. And I said, man, I didn't remember seeing all these crocodiles on the side of the river at night. And the guy who was driving the boat said, of course not. They hang out in the middle of the river during the day. And so I was like, oh, great. But you know what? Lord. We survived it, right? And then shortly after that is actually when we went to Machu Picchu in Peru. And that was like, I'm going to jump back a slide actually, because there's something here. So I don't know, maybe you know this, Angel, but do you know this sculpture that's on the side of this slide? Do you know what that is? It's okay if you don't, because most people don't actually know what that is.
Is that a mermaid?
It's actually Michelangelo's Moses. So it's a Michelangelo sculpture of Moses. So mermaid, Moses, about the same thing, right? So when I was in undergrad in 1999, I was talking to there was a professor that was a history professor, and he was talking about the Renaissance, and he was talking specifically about how Michelangelo was like the quintessential Renaissance man, right? He could do everything. And he stopped and he said, listen, the best sculpture in the entire world is Michelangelo's Moses. Now that's a controversial statement because one, you're making a value judgment against like all other sculptures, but then also you're saying this is better than like some of the other Michelangelo sculptures, right? Like Michelangelo's David, which is, far more famous than this one of Moses. But he was insistent that this was the greatest of all Michelangelo sculptures. And he told this story about how when, and this is the centerpiece to Pope Julius II's tomb, actually. I think that's the right pope, but one of the popes during the Renaissance commissioned Michelangelo to make this centerpiece for his tomb, right? So he's unveiling this to the Pope, right? And they pull like a sheet off of it and there's a crowd gathered around and he's kind of down on his haunches and he's just not saying anything, right? He's just staring at it. And there's this uncomfortable silence, right? And finally, one of his students comes up to him and he's like, hey, master, like, you have to say something. And he takes a chisel and he throws it at this sculpture and he says one word. He says the word move. Just move, because he was so passionate about this idea that, that this sculpture was so great. It was so hyper realistic. I mean, there are parts in the marble in the robe that are so thin you can shine a flashlight through it, right? I mean, it is really, really impressive. And it's about like 10 feet tall. I mean, it's not tiny, right? And it's just a super impressive, carved out of a single block of marble. And anyway, so Michelangelo says, move really loud like this. And he's like, the point is he's just completely totally passionate about this. And I remember hearing that story and I was like, man, I don't even know what sorry about that. Something fell above me. Hopefully it wasn't serious. And anyway, so I hear this story about this, about this thing. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't even know what I want to do with my life. And here Michelangelo's like so hyper into this one sculpture that he's willing to stand in front of the most important person in his life and the most important person in the whole world. The popes during the Renaissance were like a combination of like God and like the president of every country in the world, right? I mean, these are like, there isn't anyone today that's nearly as powerful as what a pope would have been at that time. He's willing to throw it all away and scream at this piece of rock in front of the Pope. So he's just that passionate. And I think I need to see this so I can figure out what I want to do. And that's actually how I ended up doing all this other stuff, right? Like going on these excursions. Because in 99, about 3 weeks after I heard that story, I hopped on a plane to London. And the Moses is in Rome. So, being bad at geography, I thought I'll just fly to the cheapest place I can in Europe. And I ended up in London and I had 30-day round trip tickets. So it was like, I'd gotten an income tax refund that spring for like $3,000 because of like Hope Learning credit or whatever, one of these educational credits. And I was working at a 7-Eleven making $7 an hour. So this was an insane amount of money. But I called up 1-800-Priceline in the pre-internet days and made an offer to fly to Paris and Rome. And they were rejected handedly. And I got a really cheap ticket, like $250 to London. So I was like, I'm going to London. I'm going to figure this out. So I go on this little quest across the continent, with a backpack by myself and never been to a foreign country before. And I get to Rome and the Moses is actually on a hill above the Colosseum, kind of overlooking the Colosseum. There's this little church called San Pedro in Vincia or in Vincole, something like that. It means St. Peter in chains. All right. So I go into this little church and I get in there and there's like, this altar in the center with like a box with like old chains in it that are supposedly the chains that Peter wore when he was released from prison by the angels. And I'm looking around and I don't see this Moses anywhere. And like, this is like way before smartphones and stuff. And I don't have any way to verify it. And I'm like, where the heck is Moses? Like, it's supposed to be in this church. I was relying completely on the fact that this professor told me it was in a church on a hill above the Colosseum. And so I'm like, well, I'm here. Where is it? And I'm walking around this church and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And in the corner, there's like this dark corner and I see in the corner this like shadowy figure that you can barely see. And I realized that it's just hiding out there in the corner, tucked away. And I'm like, man, this is really sad, right? And I go over there and I'm like, man, I should have brought a flashlight or something. It's that dark. And I see this little box that you can put coins in. And when you put coins in it, it lights up the Moses. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I find some coins and I put it in this box. And the thing lights up and it's like, like it's, and it was like, I mean, I felt like, it was going to be like this, like, imagine like, the scene in the movie where like, there's like a soundtrack playing and everyone's excited, because this is like that turning point where I'm going to figure out my whole life. And I see this Moses and it's fantastic. I mean, it's a beautiful sculpture. I actually think it might be the best sculpture in the world. I'm not even going to take away from that, but I was very underwhelmed. I was like, yeah, it's a great sculpture, but I still have no idea what I want to do with my life. So I went outside of the church and I sat down on the front steps, and I'm young and dumb. So I started smoking a cigarette because I used to smoke back then. And I'm smoking this cigarette and I'm looking down at the Colosseum, right? And I'm thinking, I still don't know what I want to do with my life, but I know I like old stuff. And so that's how I ended up at all these other places like Petra and, the pyramids in Egypt, so Jordan and Peru. And it was really just like, I don't know, I'm just going to make a list of places that I want to go before I die. And the last thing on that list was Machu Picchu. That was the last thing on the list. And this is the only things I could think of. It was literally the pyramids, Petra, and Machu Picchu. And it was because I was like, I want to see older things. And those are the ones that popped into my head. It turns out that the pyramids are the only one of those things that are actually older than the Colosseum. Machu Picchu is only about 600 or 700 years old. But, I didn't know that then, and we didn't have Google handy. So I went there. I get to Machu Picchu. Right now, focusing on 2008, I'm 30 years old. I just literally crossed the last thing off my bucket list. I've got this law firm that I'm, making money. We're growing. We've got the television commercial. I mean, everything is going really great. I even have a couple of other attorneys that are working for me. And that's where I am, August of 2008. And then something happened that changed the course of my life and gave me the clarity that, that I didn't find by looking at Moses. I don't know if you know what that is. Normally I ask the crowd, but because you're my crowd, you have to tell me. What do you think that is?
It looks kind of like a propeller.
Yeah, well, you know what it is? It's actually the honest to goodness needle that they use to dig into my hip to take bone marrow out of my hip in September of 2008. Now, if you're paying attention to the timeline, September of 2008 is about 2 weeks after I left Machu Picchu. By this point, both of the attorneys that I had working for me had quit. So I went from having 2 attorneys to just me. And then I was diagnosed with leukemia in a 2-week period. I went from pretty much having accomplished everything I wanted to do in my life to in the hospital, dying of leukemia, and my firm was falling apart. And it was a pretty shocking event. This is not something that you plan on. And a quick pro tip, by the way, if you have a bucket list, you shouldn't, because they're bad news. Because when you go to Machu Picchu and you cross that last thing off the bucket list, you get leukemia. So you don't want to do that. But if you do have a bucket list, put a lot of things on it, because you don't want to finish it. Because, I don't know about you, but I'm not ready to die yet. But the thing is, this wasn't even the worst thing that happened to me. So I get diagnosed with leukemia. The law firms, and quickly falling into shambles. We had a situation where between January and August, I made a pretty good amount of money. And so we were doing okay. But the law firm cost about $4,000 or $5,000 a week to break even. And we went from more than that in revenue to zero revenue overnight. And we used our credit cards to pay the bills, to pay my staff. I used the cash and savings that we had. And we worked really hard to make sure all of our clients were taken care of, but we just couldn't take new clients, right? I brought in other attorneys and paid them to cover cases for me, but I didn't take new cases. I had a friend from law school come over and do a lot of volunteer work for me to make sure that we could take care of all of our clients. But ultimately, we ended up bankrupt in December of 2010. So that was really the real bottom for me. And listen, when I was in the hospital diagnosed with leukemia, my brother came in and he said to me, he said, I'm sure today's a bad day, right? And I said, well, listen, I was diagnosed with leukemia at 10 o'clock at night. I thought to myself, well, the first 22 hours were pretty good. So no, not really, because I had this plan of never having bad days, and I was very stubborn at it. And if this had happened like a week after I decided, I'm sure I would have had a bad day. But if you've been a decade or more without a bad day, like you built up a little resilience, and I think that's really important. And so I think that's like the number one thing. If you forget everything I talk about, and we're going to circle to real estate here in just a minute, but if you talk about everything I talk about, you forget everything. The most important thing I think you can do is recognize that good and bad stuff happens to everyone, and you don't have to let this stuff ruin your life, right? So you just got to focus on the positive and minimize the negative. And I know, like, Angel and I talked about this off the air before, because she's had things in her life that have been challenging, but she's recognized that there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad in life, and I think that's super important. But I'll tell you, that day, going in front of a bankruptcy trustee was a day that I was really worried about. Like you file bankruptcy in December, and it's scheduled for early January. Actually, I think it was late December, scheduled for this hearing, and I didn't go in front of this group of people and a bankruptcy trustee, a person who, frankly, I'd been in front of hundreds of times in my professional capacity, someone I know really well, and he was like the scary trustee. There's like in the bankruptcy world, there's some trustees that are kind of easy to deal with, and then there's ones that are a little bit harder, and then there's the scary trustee. That's who this guy was, right? So if you're watching, Jeff, his name is Jeff also, I promise I'm not mad at you. But anyway, like, so I'm in front of this scary trustee, and I'm like nervous about it, and like, I don't get nervous very easy, but I'm like, this is just really embarrassing. I'm going in front of, like, I'm a bankruptcy attorney, and I'm going in front of all these other attorneys and stuff and saying, hey, I'm bankrupt, right? And I sat down, and normally he just starts right away. And he looked at me, and he looked at my wife, and he said, I'm really sorry you're going through this. And that meant a lot, actually, because I never heard him say a nice word to anyone that came in front of him before, but he knew, it was just, this stuff can happen to anyone. It doesn't really matter. Like, I mean, if I could go back and do it differently, could I have prepared differently and maybe prevented this from happening? Maybe, right? Like, maybe I could have started investing in real estate when I was 15. And so I had this like other stream of income, but I didn't do that. And I don't know very many 15-year-olds that do. And, the stupid part is I should have, because that was the one thing I liked. And back when I was traveling Europe, I was talking to random people about how I wanted to be a real estate investor. And when I was 15, I was like, sneaking out of my bedroom late at night to watch like late night infomercials with no money down programs, stuff like that. Cause I'm a weirdo like that. I mean, I really do like real estate, but I didn't do it. I didn't really buy any real estate until after all this. Then like flash forward, right? Like if that was the end of my story, it would be tragic. But the reality is it's not the end of my story. Now we're 10 years later, right? I mean, not even actually, like 9.5 years later, and I don't have a job. And I do real estate investing full time. And that's the power of real estate, right? And that's why, like, when you talk about real estate investing rocks, right, which it really does, it's an amazing thing. I'm really, really passionate about helping people get involved in real estate and make those kind of, positive life changes. And, listen, when I was in the hospital, another thing happened, just to give you an idea of like how scary this time was. I'm in the hospital and my white blood cell count was 258,000. I don't know if you know about white blood cell counts, but they're supposed to be like between 4,000 and 11,000. And I had a cousin who died about 2 years before I was diagnosed. She had leukemia. Her white blood cell count when she died was around 150. right? So when I heard I had a 250 white blood cell count, I accepted almost immediately that I was going to die. Like I believed I was going to die. My dad came into the hospital that night and he said, if you live till February, this is in, September, right? He said, if you live till February, I'm going to take you to Australia. And, I said to him, I just looked at him and I said, I'm not going to live till February, right? I'm not. I'm going to hopefully make it till Christmas so that I can have one last Christmas and I can say goodbye. I mean, that's the kind of mindset I was in, but at the same time, I was okay with it. I had done all this great stuff, I had really actually completed my bucket list, which is something that most people don't get to do in their lifetime. But the other thing is I had gotten to this point where I was like, okay, I'm okay with this. Like, I don't want to die. Like that first thought was, I don't want to die. The second thought was, if I do, I've lived a really good life and a better life than a lot of other people have. So that's the second takeaway from my story, I think is most important. Is the first one is you just don't have bad days because it's just not worth it. Like give them up now, get over it, recognize that bad and good stuff happens to everyone. But if I can go through this stuff like leukemia and bankruptcy and not have bad days, right, then you can too. But try to skip the leukemia and bankruptcy step if you can help it. And then the second takeaway is they're like, you have to be really content and you have to live your life now. So you have to pick the things that are important to you and do them now. So if you want to invest in real estate, and hopefully that's why you're watching the show today, then you should do that now. It doesn't matter that we're, in the middle of a global pandemic. And that's terrible. And there's a lot of, trauma associated with that. It doesn't matter that we're potentially late in the real estate market cycle. I'm going to talk a little bit about that shortly. The point is you just got to get started and you got to do it. And that applies to everything in your life. So I did live past February and my dad did take me to Australia, although he didn't take me to Australia until 2013. And so, that's the picture of us or me in front of the Ayers Rock in Australia in 2013. In 2016, I was able to go with my dad to Egypt. That was the third time I'd been to Egypt. Or maybe the fourth. I don't know. I've been to Egypt a lot. I really love Egypt. I think people should go to Egypt. So the pyramids are amazing, but I got this picture of my dad standing in front of the pyramids, which is really great because the thing is, my dad's 70, right? And if I don't do this stuff with him now, he might not be able to do it even if I can, right? And then we went last year in the fall to China, right? So good timing on that, by the way. Glad I got to China before, say, this year, right? Because it's a little bit different. Yeah. So that's me at the, climbing the Great Wall in China. And then in February, I climbed to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. I spent the entire month of February in Africa. I went to Ethiopia and Kenya and Tanzania. But that was sort of a life goal of mine to make it to 19,341 feet. I'll never go that high again. I'm confident of that. It was the most miserable, terrible, hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but I don't regret it at all. And the only reason I've been able to do all of this stuff is because I've gotten myself to a point in life where I can take a month off and go to Africa. Right? Not everyone can do that. And that's why I think real estate investing rocks. So that's the sort of life story stuff. So do you have any questions about that before I move on, or is it cool?
I love all the pictures. It's really awesome. I've never been anywhere outside of the US and Mexico because I'm absolutely terrified of flying.
Well, you can drive to Canada, so you should try that because I've been to almost every province in Canada and it's amazing. But Xanax, that might be the trick.
Right. So a story about Xanax. I was pregnant with either our third child or our fourth. I don't really remember. And we were at my OB. And it's February. And I fly every year in June because I score AP exams.
Sure.
And so I go to my OB. It's February. I'm like, Dr. Lamar, I'm flying in June and I'm already freaking out. And he said, how much Xanax do you need? And which is really bad. It's a category X. So it's known to cause birth defects.
Yeah.
And he was still like, if you're already worried about flying and it is, February, that's going to cause a whole lot more damage than Xanax during the flight.
Sure. Yeah. So did it help?
Yeah, it helps.
Okay, well there. So when you want to fly to China next time, which by the way, right now, I think China's actually probably relatively safe, but this travel stuff, like it's going to be a minute before we can do international travel again. Like, and so hopefully, sooner rather than later, we'll be able to get out. Like right now I'm supposed to be in Egypt, which I realize is super ironic, because I said that I've been to Egypt a bunch of times, but I met this guy who's 79 years old and has wanted to go to Egypt since he was 7. And he's like, man, like he was introduced to me because a friend of ours said, hey, my friend Jeff's been to Egypt a bunch of times and maybe he can give you some pointers. And he just kept saying, well, I don't really want to go on a tour. I want to go on my own, but I'm afraid to go on my own. And I just said, you know what, like, let's just do it. So we were planning on going in April to Egypt, and we would just be getting home now. We were going to go for 2 weeks at the end of April, beginning of May. But obviously that didn't happen, which is, sad because I haven't been there since 2016 and I'd like to go again. I have friends there. And, that quick side note on the COVID stuff, it's super hard for people here in the United States. But it's really, really hard for people that live in countries that are dependent on tourism. Like I have a friend who's in Tanzania. He's a safari guide. They take people out in Land Rovers to the Serengeti National Park and stuff like that. And he makes about $20 a day when he's working. When you make $20 a day in Tanzania, you're actually on the higher end of the income scale, which is really disturbing, actually, when you think about it. And they work about 8 to 10 days a month at that rate. Well, now they're a month and a half, almost 2 months into not making any money. And when you make $20 a day, you live day to day. You don't live paycheck to paycheck. You really live day to day. Now, he's okay-ish because he raises chickens on the side, and so he's got food, right? But there's no money. There's very few things open. The transparency in their government is much, much less than us. They have much less information than we have about what's going on. They don't know how many cases there are. The testing isn't as good. So it's the point that I'm making is like people that are in these developing nations are in actually probably much, much worse situation than what we realize. And maybe one of the biggest lasting consequences of the coronavirus is going to be the devastation it causes economically, not here in the U.S., which, I mean, obviously that's significant. I'm not minimizing that. But in places like Egypt or Tanzania and China, I think is going to have some serious issues too. Australia, the other thing that I had on my slide, probably come out okay on that. So, well, we're going to go back to my presentation. I decided to switch over to you just for fun for a second. I hope that was all right with you. Glad you weren't. What's that?
No, I bet that like even in LDCs, like just less developed countries, not so much third world, but even less developed countries are going to have some of those same issues going on. Because like my sister-in-law's husband posted, they're in Saudi right now. They took a job there for a few years. And she was saying that like they have drone attacks that just are a little too close for comfort. And like they are on full 24-hour curfew. They can only leave between certain hours. And the availability of information there is very different from
your Islamic world countries, they tend to control information a lot more than what we do. They don't have, and China as well, by the way. I mean, in China, Google's blocked. Like it doesn't exist. Like you can't use Google in China. There's and Facebook and WhatsApp blocked, completely blocked from their internet. They have a firewall built in to prevent those sites from even being accessible from mainland China. So yeah, I mean, if you're in a place that's controlling information like that, and then you have, a global problem like we have now, it's gonna create a lot of fear and uncertainty. And yeah, in Kenya and Tanzania right now, they have 3 or 4 hours a day they're allowed to leave the house, and then only if they have permission or if they have one of the few qualified reasons And then it's, if you get too far away from your house, they're like, well, where are you going? Things like that. And there's other things too, like we were talking to a person who runs a charity in Mozambique recently, and this person, Katie, her charity actually helps people, saves people from sex trafficking, actually. So women and children that are being abused, she goes and secures them first, and then helps them, reestablish their lives. But there's a real problem going on now in Mozambique because some of the more radical Islamic people are targeting Christians because they know they're going to be in their homes. So they're leaving and going and attacking people that are in their houses because they know they're going to be there. And of course, there's less people on the streets, so there's less witnesses, and so there's this like huge social impact of the coronavirus situation that, like, frankly, we're very fortunate that we don't have to deal with here. But it's a global problem. But anyway, so yeah, that's sort of my story in a nutshell. Now, if you want, we can talk about some real estate stuff if we still have time.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I have 3 topics, and if if we get too far, into this, then we'll just skip one, right? No big deal. So you just tell me if you want to cut it out. But these are the 3 topics that I really felt like talking about today. Spend a little bit more time on my story than I usually do, but I think it's really relevant right now to talk about the real estate market cycle, where we are in the cycle. Before the coronavirus, everyone was talking about the real estate market cycle. Oh, we're really late. We're in the 9th inning of this game, and like we're due for a recession. Well, now we're probably in a recession. Right? Like, I think we're in recession right now. I don't know how that impacts the market cycle in real estate, but we're going to explore how we might be able to find out where we really are in the real estate market cycle. We're going to talk about cap rates, not about like what they are in a specific market, but like what they are in general and why they're important. We're just going to spend like 5 minutes on that because I think it's really important. And then we're going to talk about passive investing, which is something you mentioned at the beginning. And one of the things we talk about on the Old-Fashioned Real Estate Show is something we call the passivity scale. And I'm just spend like a couple minutes explaining why I think that's really important when making a decision about how to get started in real estate investing. And I think if you understand these 3 topics, you can probably be successful in any market cycle at any time in any kind of real estate that you want to invest in. Without any further ado, we will start talking about real estate market cycles. So usually when I'm doing this presentation like live in front of a group, we spend a little time asking people how long the real estate market cycle is. And I hear all these different times, like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And then I put up this chart where I say, it looks like 18 years to me, right? And this chart is from a story or really an essay that was written by Fred Fulvery called The Depression of 2008. Fred Fulvery is an Ivy League professor, economist, and he studied the cycles of construction, business, and land values over a 200-year period. And he came up with this chart. What's interesting about this is when he wrote The Depression of 2008 was 1999. Now, think about that for a second, right? In 1999, he wrote an article called The Depression of 2008. And then, of course, in 2008, we had a huge market correction. And, so to me, when Fred Fulvery talks, I'm interested in hearing what he says because he hit this one right on. Now, that doesn't mean he's always going to be right, but his basic argument was that the normal length of a real estate market cycle is 18 years. And it lags behind the business cycle by just a little bit. So, it predates the business cycle by just a little bit. So the business cycle actually lags behind that. So like peak land value, real estate prices, sometime around 2006 is when we hit the peak real estate, prices. He predicted this beforehand. And he did this based on his study of long-term economic trends. Based on this, he believes that the next real estate market cycle peak would be 18 years after 2006, which would be 2024. So like people are saying, well, we're way too far into the real estate market cycle, like we're overdue for a correction and, all this stuff. But the reality is if you look at history, a lot of times it's 18 years. Now, you also look at this chart, you see it's like 18 years, 18 years, 18 years, 17 years, 18 years. Then it's 48 years. Talk about being overdue for a real estate correction, right? But you know what happened between 1925 and 1973 is you had World War II, right? And that messed everything up. It just did. And so, if we have a world war or some other unpredictable thing like a global pandemic, it could mess this up, right? Like, we don't know like what the effect of these major world shocks are. And it's really interesting because you hear people comparing the unemployment rate now to the Great Depression, which, also was between 1925 and 1973, right? And like the early part of that. And they're saying that this is proof that like, we're going into a depression or we're going to have a recession that's really deep and really long. And I think no one really knows for sure. I mean, it's impossible to predict, just like it was impossible to predict in 1925 that the real estate market cycle wasn't going to peak for 48 more years. Right. And so my argument would be we might have already hit peak. Could have happened last year. Or a few months ago, right before the global pandemic, or we might be 10 or 15 years from the peak. Like we just don't know at this point, but there are some things we can do to kind of figure out where we are in the market cycle. And it will become much more obvious, once we get 3 or 4 months down the road. And what we're going to look at is this. This is the market cycle quadrants, right? This comes from another professor. This is a Harvard professor from his textbook, real estate finance textbook, where he basically laid out the market cycle in quadrants. And he said, look, it's phase 1, 2, and 3, recovery, expansion, hypersupply, and recession. This to me is maybe the most important chart in all of real estate investing. Because if you understand the X and Y axis of this particular chart, then you can tell exactly where you are in the real estate market cycle at any time. So the X-axis, the horizontal line, right, is long-term occupancy, like average long-term occupancy. That's right here. Can you see my cursor, by the way?
Yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah. So this is
Really
long-term
awesome.
average occupancy, right? So what that means is not like 5-year, 10-year occupancy. That's like 40, 50-year occupancy. So like you're north of Dallas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's just say Dallas. So, I mean, I know you're a little bit out of Dallas, but like the data is probably easy to find for Dallas, right? So we can look at apartment complex occupancy rates on average over a 25 or 30-year period. It has to be more than 18 years because it has to be longer than the average length of the market cycle, because otherwise you won't know. Best would be like 50 years, right? So if you have this like long-term average, and let's just say for sake of argument that apartment complexes average 95%. And we can narrow it down even further than that. It might be 95% occupancy in Class A apartment complexes in Dallas, right? Let's just say, I don't know what it is. I haven't researched it. I'm blaming this on you because you didn't give me a lot of warning, or I could have looked up this data. But the point is, like, let's just imagine that it's 95%. If right now we measure occupancy at apartments and they're 97%, then we're above that line. If it's 92%, we're below the line, right? So if it's 97% and it averages 95, we know we're in either phase 2 or phase 3. Like for sure, we have to either be in expansion or hypersupply. And then the next variable that we need to know is occupancy going up or is it going down? If we know that, then we know if we're on the right or left side of the vertical line, right? So that's the direction of occupancy line. So if it's going up and we're above average, we're in expansion. Okay. If it's going down and we're above average, we're in hypersupply. If it's going down and we're below average occupancy and occupancy still falling, that's recession, right? And it makes sense if you think about it. Like if you're below average occupancy, there's a lot of vacancy, right? And also it's still increasing, then we're in a recession. And the thing is, like, well, we might be in a recession from a traditional economic perspective right now, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. We know that first quarter of 2020 was negative growth because everything shut down at the end of first quarter. Now we're in second quarter and everything's still shut down in a lot of places. So we're going to have negative growth again. So that's the sort of like popular economic definition of recession. But from a real estate market cycle thing, the question is, where's occupancy right now? right? And what direction is occupancy going in? If we know those answers and we have the long-term average so we can plot it on a chart, we can say with pretty much a lot of accuracy where we are. And, typically you start at 0.1 and you end at 0.16. So like, if we know where we are, and there's a little bit more nuance to this chart, like the difference between 0.8 and 0.9, 0.9 and 0.10, like there are ways to tell that, but it's like way beyond what we can get into in sort of a short conversation. But the point is, if you can understand this chart, if you can wrap your head around it, you can really understand where you are in the market cycle. And it's actually even more interesting than that, because you can buy some of this data, right? Like this is an older report that I pulled because it's free. I didn't go buy the report, but here's like a national apartment market cycle analysis using this chart. Okay. So what this is showing in the fourth quarter of 18, so now a year and a quarter ago, it's clearly not relevant right this second, is that a lot of the apartment markets were at 0.11, some were at 12 and 13, some were even at 14. And this is an older one. I have seen newer ones that have shown that in a lot of ways it's about the same going into this year. So like last year, 2018, pretty much everything was still in expansion or just starting in hypersupply. And what hypersupply means is, by the way, that more supply is coming online, new construction of apartments, more of them are coming online right now than are being absorbed by the market. Right. And I think you're seeing that in big cities, right? I don't know how it is by you, but in Chattanooga, where I live, downtown Chattanooga, there's a bunch of new apartments. There's Class A expensive apartment stuff. It's, they're sitting at 70-80% occupancy in the brand new construction, and they're slowly filling up. But the point is, there's more new construction than there are new people moving into those, right? And the reason for that is because when you're above average occupancy, rents are going up, right? And there's a lag to this too, right? So rents are going up, and this is true even in hypersupply. Like if normally you underwrote your deal to say, hey, I want 95% occupancy because that's the average, and you're at 97%, you can raise your rents. You can justify raising your rents. You don't need to be 100% occupied to raise your rents. In fact, if you're above the occupancy that you project, you should be raising your rents because you're not at a market occupancy rate, right? So everyone's rents are going up. We've been seeing this throughout the entire expansion and into the hypersupply phase. Rents are going up. Well, when rents are going up, it creates a powerful incentive for people to start building new construction, right? And the thing about new construction is if you start building an apartment complex today, when is it done, right? Like if you literally decide, I'm going to break ground today, it's going to take you several months, probably a year to get it done. In reality, you didn't start if you broke ground today. You started 6 months or 8 months before. So you start spending money, you buy land, you get your zoning permissions, you get your, you get all of your contractors and stuff lined up, you get all your financing and stuff lined up. So you're maybe a year into it already by the time you break ground, and then you've got another year probably before you're actually done with construction. So it's like a 2-year process. And so what happens is right up until the peak of the rental market, people are starting this, right? Because if rents have been going up for 2 or 3 years, people are they're excited to go out and build new stuff. Like the numbers look really good when rents are going up. And the thing that most people don't understand is rents are going to keep going up right until you get to 0.14, right? That's the day before recession, right? Most people think, they look at this chart and they think, oops, it's the wrong way. So they look at this chart and they say 0.11 is the top of the market, right? But that's not really true. That's when occupancy starts going down, but you're still way above average occupancy rate. So rents are going to continue to climb right up till when you get to average occupancy. And the problem is if you start building at 0.13 or 14, it doesn't get done until 0.16, right? Which is why you have this steep drop, right? Like if you look at the line, it's like it kind of slowly builds up over a long period of time. And sometimes you'll even see like it'll get to 10, and then the economy will be a little bit better and it'll go back to 9, it just kind of works its way up. And then occupancy starts falling. And as occupancy is falling, because rents have been going up and people that started here and started here and started here, all that stuff's coming online, occupancy starts falling faster and faster and faster. And then when it gets to this point, there's all this new stuff coming online and there's really no new demand. And that's when you go deep into recession, right? And that's the point you want to watch for. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to buy at 0.14 and have to sell at 0.1, right? You don't want to buy at 0.14 and have to refinance at 0.1 because rates are going to have gone up. Banks are going to have tightened up on their lending. So all this stuff is going to happen. But the thing is, I don't think it actually matters if you look at it from a long term though, right? So what I was saying, if you understand this, it's important because you can understand when you want to pour on the gasoline and buy more. Like, listen, if you can time it to buy at 0.6 and sell at 0.14, that's amazing, right? But that's a little bit tricky. And I'm a buy and hold kind of guy. So what I do is I just buy whenever I buy. Right? I don't care when I buy. I buy at 0.1, I buy at 0.14, doesn't matter. Buy at 0.16. The deals come at 0.16, 0.1, 2, 3. That's when the deals are had, right? That's when you get the better deal, but you have occupancy issues. You buy at 0.14, you're paying market price. You're not getting a great deal. But the thing is, you're going to get really good financing terms at 0.14 because the banks are like, everything's great. Everyone's happy. You're going to have low interest rates. You're going to have long-term financing. So if you can lock something up with long-term financing and it cash flows well and you underwrite it properly and you can ride it out, you can always sell it at the next 0.14, right? It's not like you have to sell at 0.1. So like if you bought in 2006, right, and you had to sell in 2010, you got crushed. But if you bought in 2006 and you sold last year, you made a ton of money. I mean, you just did. So I always say buy whenever you buy and just sell when it's high. And I define high as a price that's high enough that you don't mind getting out of it, right? So get long-term financing. If you're buying something today, get long-term financing. Make sure that you're comfortable with keeping it for a long period of time because we don't know what's going to happen. And while I always say buy whenever you buy, there's a little wrinkle in it right now because of the coronavirus, which is kind of like what I don't know. That's the answer, right? Like, what do we do about COVID-19? I don't know. Can't predict the future. I still think if you're cash flowing and you buy cash flowing assets and you have a plan to keep them for a long period of time and you don't have a balloon payment come up in the next couple of years, you'll probably be fine. But normally I would say you would be fine. And now I'm saying probably be fine. So I would definitely be careful about that. So one last thought on the market cycle. Understand that there's no such thing as a national market cycle. Every area is different and every type of real estate's different. Like apartments peak at a different time than office buildings, right? If you have an office building right now, you're probably in a world of hurt because of coronavirus. It could be that you've passed peak and it's gonna crush that market for the next 10 years. It's very possible. But you know what? Whether you have coronavirus or not, people still need a place to live. So unless this thing kills like 20% of the population, which it certainly doesn't look like it's going to do, and I hope it doesn't do, right? Then demand will remain relatively static and people are afraid. So the supply is the people that are thinking about starting construction are stopping that. So we might actually be seeing in apartments that this is going to extend the market cycle beyond what we originally thought, right? Like originally I would have said 23, 24 is going to be the peak of that market. Now it might be later, right? Because there's still going to be demand. There's still going to be people, being born. There's still going to be people getting out of school. They're going to be getting new jobs. I mean, the economy is eventually going to recover. And so we could see a longer period of time of growth in certain segments of the real estate market cycle. And you got to kind of think about it based on your own market, your own place and that. So that's kind of real estate market cycles. Do you have any questions about that?
I actually do.
Sure.
So how do you account for people that can't afford their home anymore and they move into apartments? Because I believe that there's going to be a segment of the population, especially with everything that's going on right now, that are going to be maybe not forced from their homes, but they're going to lose their homes and they're going to wind up in apartments. How would that be accounted for?
Well, yeah, no, it's an interesting question. So like the like Class A stuff doesn't really solve that for them. Because the people that can't afford their houses probably can't afford $1,500 to $2,000 a month rents. But the Class B and C stuff, it definitely helps, right? I mean, those are typically more stable workforce housing. People continue to need to live somewhere, so they go there. When the economy is really good, people that would have lived in D or C class apartments move to B class apartments. People that would have lived in B move to A or housing, right, or buy a house. When the economy is really bad, shifts everything down. to B class apartments from A and from houses, and the C class stuff gets filled back up with people that would have been in B class stuff. So I think that, you know, long term workforce housing is much more stable than other areas of the market. And I don't think that anything that's happened now is going to change that. I mean, obviously, if you have a huge reduction in population due to a pandemic, like, you know, say this is 1917 and, you know, 500 million people worldwide are going to die. And then you adjust that to our current population, that'd be like 2 billion people dying. Then we would have a real problem, right? But since it doesn't appear that that's going to occur, I think, you know, those are much more stable than, say, buying a single family home would be right now. We spent some time talking to people about this very topic, and there's a wide range of opinions. This is mine. I can't guarantee it. It's just a guess, right? I mean, some people think that the workforce housing is the worst place to be right now. I don't know where they come up with that, but I hear people saying all sorts of things on Facebook.
Single family homes is the worst place to be right now.
Well, yeah, except for maybe office or retail space, right? Like,
oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, single family homes, same thing though. Like, listen, if you're buying starter homes, it's different than you're buying a $250,000 house, you know, in a middle class area. And by the way, the pricing is different in every place in the country. But like, if you're buying a starter home that's 1,200 square feet, 2 bedroom, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, that's probably not that bad because that can be rented, right? But if you're buying like a golf course community or a gated community house that's 5,000 square feet, like those are screwed. Like that's going to be a problem in my estimation. I mean, I don't really know, but it seems to me like the trends are moving against that, and the coronavirus is going to accelerate that. So one of the other reasons that I love multifamily is because of how cap rates work. And I'm going to spend like 5 minutes on this, maybe less. Yeah, because I think it's really important for people to understand. The definition of cap rate is just net operating income divided by purchase price. But that's like saying, you know, any definition, if you don't wrap your head around it, it doesn't really mean anything. So what capitalization rates really are is they're a metric for valuing property that's commercial property. So commercial is like 5 units and up on the residential side. So like when you go to an appraiser and you're buying a house or a duplex or something, they're just looking at other houses and duplexes in the neighborhood, and they're saying, okay, it's about the same square footage, so it's worth this amount of money. You know, and they make some adjustments if it has more bedrooms or whatever. But with commercial properties, like, you know, a 20, 30, 40, 50 unit building or an office building or something, they're going to apply what's called a market capitalization rate, which is really a metric that says, hey, we're going to look at what are people paying for the stream of cash flow this building produces. They care much more about what the money that's brought in is. So in this example, let's say I bought a building that made $100,000 a year, right? Let's just say that's the net operating income, and net operating income is all income after all expenses except for financing costs. So that's like if I paid cash and it makes $100,000 a year, how much would I pay for that, right? The purchase price is what I would pay for it. The operating income is how much cash it generates if I paid cash. So in my imaginary scenario, let's say that the purchase price was $1 million and it made $100,000 a year. I picked those numbers because they're super easy math, right? 100,000 divided by a million equals 10%. So that would be like a 10% cap rate. Now, if you find that deal today, I say go buy it because that's insane, right? Like cap rates are much lower than that right now. But the point is, the lower the cap rate, the higher the purchase price. And it's an inverse relationship. So like if the cap rate was 5% and it made the same exact building, it was $100,000 property, $100,000 income property, made $100,000 a year. I divide by $2 million, right? Then I would come up with 5%. 100,000 divided by 2 million is 5%. And that's kind of what the point is, that you can kind of, if you have 2 out of the 3 variables, you can calculate the other one. So you can switch it around. It's just basic algebra. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, but if my purchase price is 2 million and the net operating income is 100,000, right? I can divide that by the cap rate, and that's going to make the formula balance. So if the cap rate's 5%, 100,000 divided by 5% equals $2 million, because it's just, switching the which variable you're calculating for. So if you know the cap rates in the market, then you can calculate the purchase price times the cap rate, and you can estimate what the net operating income is. So the thing is, like, it all sounds a little complicated, but it's really important, because what this means is it's a way to evaluate properties across a more dispersed area, right? In a market where you're buying a 50-unit apartment building, there might not be 20 of them for the appraiser to look at. So instead, what they're going to do is they're going to say, I'm going to look at all apartment buildings in this neighborhood in Dallas, and I'm going to say, what did they sell for? How much income did they generate? And I'm going to calculate out what a market cap rate is. And then I'm going to look at this one that I'm appraising, and I'm going to say, how much income does it generate, right? And I'm going to divide that by the cap rate, and I'm going to know what the value is. In my scenario, that's this purchase price number. But from an appraiser's perspective, it's not purchase price, it's appraised price or appraised value, right? So why this is really important, though, is if you want to raise the value of your building, all you have to do is increase the net operating income or decrease the cap rate. We don't have a lot of control over cap rates because that's a market indicator, but you actually do have a lot of control over your net operating income. If you're operating a property more efficiently, cutting back on expenses, raising rents, making capital improvements to make it so that you can get higher rents, you can really use that to force appreciation. And this is where I think that the workforce housing is probably the best place to be investing for most people. You can't just start there. You're not going to, look, if you don't have any real estate right now, don't go try to buy a 50-unit apartment building, right? Like, that's going to be tricky. I didn't start there. My first deal was a condo, like a single family condo, like $30,000 property, right? It wasn't an apartment building, but I love apartment buildings because of this ability to control the thing. If I raise rents on a 50-unit building by $10 a unit, that's an extra $500 that, a month in income that I don't really have any extra expenses for. If I raise it by 100, it's an extra $5,000 a month in income. Well, if I'm increased the net operating income by $50,000 or $60,000 a year by raising rents $100, that $60,000 a year divided by the cap rate is added equity that just appeared kind of out of nowhere. And this is how you can make really good money. I'm going to give you a quick example about this. The first deal I ever did multifamily wise was a 12-unit apartment building. We bought it in October of 2017. We paid $635-ish thousand for it. Okay. Put $130,000-$40,000 down, 20% down. We've had it for about 2.5 years now. And we refinanced it about 3-4 months ago. When we refinanced it, we were able to take out more than our down payment. The reason we were able to do that is because when we bought it, the rents were $550 on average, and now our rents are about $800. So we've increased the rents $250. Now, part of that's market rents have gone up, right, the last couple of years. Part of it's we did things like renovate the units. So we've taken the cash flow that we were generating and put it back into the property. But what's happened is in a 2-year period, the value went from the $640,000 that we paid for it to a high enough value that when we refinanced it, we're able to take out more than our original down payment in a 2-year period. And the reason for that is the net operating income increased by $25,000 or $30,000 during that period. The market cap rate meant that added $250,000, $300,000 in equity. And now we refinance it, we get our money back, and we still own it. It still cash flows, and we have $0 into it. Actually, we have negative money into it, right? Because we got more money out than we put in. And that right there is why I think it's super important to understand capitalization rates, because once you wrap your head around this,
that's infinite returns.
Oh yeah, it's infinite returns. That's the thing. Like we want infinite returns. Like that's the goal, right? The faster you get your money out and put it back to work on something else, the better. So like that's my strategy. And if you can do that and you get the right financing in place and you time the market right because you know that first stuff, then you're in really good shape. Now, by the way, I should tell you on both this topic, the previous topic, and then the next topic, on the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show, we've done whole episodes on each topic. So you can just go to like youtube.com/oldfashionedrealestate. You can find the cap rate episode or the market cycle episode, and you can watch that, and it might give you a little bit more information. Like on the market cycle one, I get out a whiteboard and I draw on it and stuff. It's kind of fun. Plus, we didn't talk about my show, but we basically just get drunk and talk about real estate. So it's really fun that way too. So you guys should all subscribe and watch the show. So the last topic which this is going to take like 2 minutes and then we're going to wrap up. So the last topic is the passivity scale. And I started by talking about this, and we have an episode of the show on this as well. But I think this is really important when you're deciding to get started in real estate, is like, how much work do you really want to do? Like on one end of the scale, we have, self-managing, and on the other, we have like real estate investment trusts. And I think this is important to understand. Like on the left, right, that's the most passive you can get. The right is the least passive. And when you're getting involved in real estate, I think it's really important to, kind of figure out like how much effort do you want to put in. And I look at risk and reward as a function, as an inverse relationship. The more risk you take, the higher return you're going to get. Well, risk is mitigated by being more active, and that will also help you get a higher return. So like if you're self-managing, you're going to make more on a deal than if you just invest in a REIT, which is like a exchange traded fund, where it's just like you have exposure to real estate sort of, but it's almost more like a stock because it correlates more with equities than it does the real estate market cycle. And then self-managing, I mean, there's even a step further than that. Like you could construct something from scratch and then manage it, right? Like that's even less passive than managing something yourself. But the key here is professional management. People have this idea that if you go hire a third-party property management, that's passive. It's not. It's more passive than managing it yourself, but it's not completely passive. You still have to find the property, right? You still have to figure out who you want to manage it. Maybe a little bit more passive than that is like turnkey investing, where a management company of some form or a turnkey company's already found a property. They've already kind of rented it up, and then they sell that opportunity to you. But your return's going to be lower. They're going to have soaked up some of that return, right? So kind of as a general rule, as you move to more passive, you're giving away bigger and bigger chunks of the deal, right? And that's true of the other way that you can invest passively, which is something that you talked about, and that's, investing with people you trust. I think that's almost as passive as a REIT, right? You're going to do a little bit of due diligence on the front side, right? You want to see the deal, think about it. You're going to vet your deal sponsors, your syndicators. And that's important, right? That's why I say invest with people you trust. Don't just invest in anybody's deal. Like, don't just be like, oh, this person says they have a great deal. It's going to give me a 20% return. I'm going to go do it. Well, like, if it is going to give you a 20% return, please call me because I might want to invest in that deal. But I'm skeptical off the bat when people start throwing numbers around unless they can back them up. Right? And they have to have something that makes sense. So you're going to do that due diligence on the front side and see what makes sense. I've invested in other people's deals. I invested in an apartment complex in Louisville where I own a tiny percentage of it, 100 and some units in Louisville. But I've also put together deals where I've had people invest in my deals, and that's way less passive if you're putting the deal together, right? Because then you have this extra step of having, helping your investors understand what it is that you're doing. So that's kind of the passivity scale. I think this is super useful. Again, we did an episode on this as well. Do you have any questions about that, or is it kind of straightforward?
Well, see, I always thought like with our single family homes, we use management companies, and I always figured, hey, we just collect the mailbox money. But now that you say it, I'm like, well, no. Yesterday I had a phone call because we're getting a new roof put on and we had to approve that. And then the AC went out. So we had to approve that. And then there was a plumbing issue that had to be rerouted through the attic. And yeah.
No. And I think that's a common misconception. And listen, we did an episode on how to hire property managers too, right? So my partner on the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show is a guy named Brian Leverage. Literally his last name is Leverage, which is hilarious for a real estate investor. But anyway, so the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show, that's this guy here, right?
He could be a banker.
Yeah, he should be, but he's not. He's a real estate investor. So, but anyway, so on the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show, we often talk about that, but he also runs a property management company. So we did a couple like on screening tenants and on like hiring a professional property manager and why that might make sense for you and when it might not. So if people are interested in those topics, and I think we have about 40 episodes now. We come up with one every other week, and we've been doing it a year and a half. So I'm happy to share that with people. And then they can find us at oldfashionedrealestate.com. And if they go on there, there's a place they can sign up for a free 15-minute call with me. Honestly, though, if you really want to do that free 15-minute call with me, you want to talk to me about whatever real estate related thing in the world that you want to talk about, you're better off to reach out to me on Facebook. And I'm not hiding, or on my personal website, which is jeffreyholst.com, because the Old Fashioned Real Estate website, like, the link doesn't always work right. So I got to fix this slide. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of warnings, so I didn't actually spend a lot of time working on my presentation. And then the other thing I do now, which is probably my newest, and I think it's sort of my passion project, is Last Life Ever. I know Angel knows a little bit about Last Life Ever, but Last Life Ever is a podcast, a Facebook group, and we just talk to people living the best version of their lives. It comes down to helping people not have bad days. It comes down to helping people with investing in real estate. It comes down, but it's not a real estate group, right? It comes down to helping people do whatever it is that they want to do with their life and setting those goals. So like in the most recent episode, we interviewed my brother. That's a coincidence. We normally don't interview my family members, but in the most recent episode, we interviewed him. When I was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, my brother came with me. He actually ended up with acute mountain sickness and ended up in the hospital for 4 days in Tanzania and did not get a chance to make it to the top of the mountain as a result of that. Mm-hmm. And his attitude was amazing. If you ask him about it, he said, look, I went and I climbed this mountain for 6 days and I went down for a day. The whole hike is 8 days. So he did 7 of the 8 days. So he's like, hey, I got 7/8 of the value out of that. But I also had this experience of being in a hospital in a developing world country, and getting to know local people in a way that I never would any other way. And I went to Africa for the experience. I didn't go to Africa because I wanted to stand in a specific spot of Africa, right? And that kind of attitude is so amazing to me, and it fits really well into the Last Life brand. So when he was telling me that, I thought, I have to get this guy on my show, even though it's my brother. I was like, you have to be on the show. And then the other thing is we did the Coronavirus Collective, which you can buy on Amazon. 100% of the proceeds go to charity. It's a series of 26 or 27 different authors writing stories during the first 3 weeks of the coronavirus shutdown, people from all over the world, like Katie McGill, who's in Mozambique, that I was alluding to earlier, that runs the charity to help stop sex trafficking. But there's a girl that grew up as a nomad in Mongolia. There's, there's me writing about what I did the first few weeks. But there's just so many great authors in there. Frank McKinney, who's an internationally best-selling author, real estate investor, kind of like the rock star of real estate in a way. He writes an amazing chapter about how to use this time. And it would surprise you. It's not about how to make more money right now. It's about how to get your head right while we have this time. It consider it like a pause in life, like a break to figure it out. But there's just so much great stuff in there. And even as we open stuff up, right, it's really helpful if you're still under lockdown to read these stories and understand what these other smart people are doing, like Jillian Sidoti, who's a real estate syndication attorney, right? She writes a chapter in there and she's my partner in Last Life Ever. And she wrote, about her kids being sick, and things like that. So, I mean, it's a really great book, and I really encourage you to buy it. It's like $15 on Amazon. And like I said, 100% of the profits going to charity. I'm supporting Katie McGill's charity, supporting two missionary families, one in northern Kenya that does a outreach in Kenya, another one in northern Mexico, and then also supporting the local food bank near Jillian's home in Southern California, which is another thing that's really, I mean, you don't recognize it, but like food banks rely on donations from stores. Stores are out of food, right? Like, so they're not getting their donations. So these food banks are really suffering, which means that poor people are suffering. Kind of goes back to my original theme, which is that, like, the people that are most disadvantaged in life right now, those are the ones that are suffering the most. Those are the ones that need our help the most. And so I really feel like, the Coronavirus Collective is really good because it's giving money to those people, but it's also helping us as individuals move past what we're doing and sort of plan how we're going to move forward. And it is kind of religious. I'm not gonna lie about that. We have a pastor and 3 or 4 missionaries and that wrote chapters. So I mean, if you're super resilient to that, just buy it for the charity. Don't buy it for all of the content. You can at least read mine. I didn't write a religious article. So anyway, listen, that's all I have. I hope I hope I lived up to your expectations.
That was amazing. That's
Thank you.
Wow. Just all of it. And I think that one of the things that I've really loved about coming into this space, because we weren't always around a lot of multifamily people. We were around, just our family. I grew up in a family that invested in real estate. My grandparents got into it in the late 70s, early 80s. My grandmother had a GED. My grandfather worked really hard for an associate's degree. They weren't typical real estate people.
Sure.
But they were able to get in that period where it was kind of that sweet spot where if somebody had any cash and they got in, they made money. And so my grandparents were able to find success with that. Well, my husband's family are more typical real estate people. And his father decided small multi was the way to go. And he wound up, I think he has 62 units. And so
significant amount. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was only natural that Jason and I would eventually wind up in real estate. But I'm blown away at just the amount of knowledge that you brought. And then just that outlook. And that's kind of where I was going, with that most of the time people that are having a lot of success in real estate have that mindset.
And they don't talk about it enough, right? Like, that's why, like, when people invite me on to talk at places, my first thing is like, can I talk about mindset? I would rather not even, like, I bring the real estate stuff because I think it's important. I really do. And those are 3 topics. And I have a couple other ones that I like to talk about. Those are important. But at the end of the day, like, if your mind's right, you can get through all this stuff. If you keep moving forward, something I learned on Kilimanjaro, like, I really struggled to get to the top. Now, obviously, my brother had his own challenges and he needed to turn around. In fact, if he hadn't, he would have died. They told him in the hospital he had an extremely bad pulmonary edema. His lungs were filling up with fluid, and his oxygen was down into the low 50s. And they said, if you had gone, even another 15 minutes, you might have died. Like, that's how bad it was, right? And it's a super, dangerous thing to get mountain sickness. But the point was that, like, my struggles were I'm overweight and it was a really hard climb and the altitude was tough because, there's not as much air up there. But I mean, it was mental, right? I mean, I just had to keep moving forward. And I kept thinking, like, I would go around this corner and especially the summit night, it's dark, it's cold. You're by yourself with just one guide walking back and forth, zigzagging up and down the summit path. And I would see the next corner 10 feet away. And I would say, if I can just make it there, I can quit. And then I would turn the corner and I'd look at the next corner and I'd think, if I can just make it there, I can quit. And I kept thinking to myself, like, I just got to go a little bit further. I just got to keep going because, like, eventually you get there. And some people would walk by, like, some people, it was easier for them. Like some of the guides, like, they're not struggling. They do this all the time. And, like, it was much easier for them to climb the mountain than me, right? They do it every day, every week, every month, whatever. But their life isn't easier than mine. Like, it'd be really easy to be, like, jealous of this person that can easily sort of saunter up the mountain, right? But remember, these guys are doing it for $10 or $15 a day to feed their children, right? They're not enjoying it. I'm paying thousands of dollars to climb this thing. And these other people are, like, having to do it over and over again through this miserable experience. And they're just enjoying their life. And you know what it taught me was that, that mindset was more important than any of it. That's really it. And if you keep moving forward, you eventually get there. And I think that's, if I could leave you, I said there were 2 things at the beginning that were important. The third thing is just keep moving forward.
Wow. Yeah, I really love that. That's awesome. Like our own little story was that we have a special needs son. And one night I was crying because we're the end of the Williams name. We don't have a boy to carry it on. And I was crying. And my husband told me, he said, what if it wasn't Anson that was given to us, but us that were given to Anson? And that switched everything up for me.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love that. You told me that the other day, and I was really, really impacted by that. So I don't have to cry this time because I already did once. But it's really great. And, listen, I don't have any children. And my last name is way less common than Williams. So, like, it might actually die out with my generation. Like, there might not be any of us left, right? There probably are somewhere, but I haven't met them. But none of my siblings, at least not with not any of the boy siblings in our family have children. My brother has a couple of adopted children, so the family name will carry on through them, two adopted sons, and that's great, and I love it. But sometimes I feel that like maybe I let my grandparents down, right, or something like that.
Well, and I was raised by my grandparents because I had some other stuff going on with my own family, but so I've got some of those like older ideas in my head.
Yeah. And that's it though. Like, but at the end of the day, right, like what your husband said about you being the right people to raise your son, that's exactly right. And that's how I feel about my life. It's like, I've been very blessed and I impact a lot of people. Like, yes, I'm not able to have children to raise, which I would love to have done, but I think I'm probably past that point in my life right now. I would have been great to do that, but I'm able to impact other people. I'm able to share my perspective with people through real estate podcasts and through networking and also through Last Life Ever, which, I think that the Coronavirus Collective is the perfect example of that. It's like, I'm not only is my story in writing, but like we're able to curate this group of people that have that positive attitude and spread it out to people even beyond just real estate investors. And to me, that's it's been really great. And it's something that I never, if you had asked me 2 years ago, would I be doing this right now? I would have been like, no, I didn't even speak publicly 2 years ago. I was just like, 2 years ago, I was working for this small company. I helped them sell out to a bigger company. I got some severance and I thought, I have enough real estate. I'm just going to take some time off. And then I thought, you know what? I don't actually like not working. I'm just never going to go back to work. I'm going to go like scuba diving and like hang out on beaches and stuff. And that was going to be my plan. And I got bored really fast. And then I thought, well, I'll start doing some syndication, right? I'll help people invest in real estate because I like that. And so I started doing that. And then I started talking to people about investing. And then I thought, well, I need to reach more investors. So I started a show and I liked doing the show. And then I interviewed Jillian on that show and I was telling her about how I wanted to expand beyond real estate investors and, kind of reach out to other people. And I had this idea for Last Life Ever. And she was like, that's amazing. I want to do it with you. And it's just been, the world has sort of conspired to get me to where I am. And I think most people that are successful, it's because they're taking the opportunities that are presented to them. And they're on the lookout for opportunities. Like I never would have thought I would be partners with Jillian Sidoti. She's like a really like super successful syndication attorney. Like, Grant Cardone's one of her clients. That's the kind of successful that she is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So and that's public record. So I can say it, it's on the Series A filings or whatever. Like that's just insane. Like I don't even know why I would be hanging out with someone as cool as that, but I am. So it works out, right? You just keep moving.
You know what? It comes back to that idea of, the universe isn't happening to you. The universe is happening for you. And as soon as you come to that realization, you are able to separate success away from other variables like numbers or money, and success becomes its own thing. It's like a living organism kind of thing where you can just be like, wow, this is successful just because it is.
Yeah, and that's actually why we started Last Life Ever, because at the end of the day, I said to people, look, it's not all about money, right? Like Mother Teresa died super poor, but she was very successful, right? She didn't want to be rich. If she wanted to be rich, she probably would have figured it out because she's obviously a very dedicated and talented individual. And the thing is, if your dream life is to be like a server at a Waffle House, then, more power to you. Go do that, right? But like, I want people to be able to live the life of their dreams, whatever that is to them. And a lot of times people don't even, they've gotten crushed by circumstances to the point where they're not even dreaming anymore. So part of that, helping people live the life of their dreams, is helping them figure out what it is that their dream life actually is. And you're I'm going to wrap up here. I hope it's okay. But your thought about the universe, not happening to you, but happening for you is kind of similar to my favorite quote. It's I always think of this, and I don't even know who came up with it, but it was like the moment that you accept full responsibility for everything in your life is the moment you decide that you can change anything in your life. Right? So that moment when you're like, this, like if you're like, oh man, this sucks, I got leukemia, then you're just going to be depressed about it. But instead you can say, I have to figure out how to react to this thing that's happening to me. Right? And I feel like I reacted the right way. It wasn't easy. Like it was challenging at points. Like I'm not going to say that, but like if you start saying like, oh, like I have a disabled child, a special needs child, like that makes my life hard. And now it's all this problems. Like if you start focusing on that, then you don't get to embrace how great it actually is. You don't get to see all the positive things that come from that. And you don't get to experience the things that you're experiencing. So it's like what my brother was saying on that last episode. It's like, yeah, would he have liked to make it to the top of Kilimanjaro? Sure. He spent thousands of dollars to do it, but he also, because he didn't make it to the top of Kilimanjaro, got an experience that I'm hopefully never going to have, but that he really, really is really glad he did have, which is he spent 4 days in a hospital in Tanzania, and he got to meet other people in the hospitals in Tanzania and got to make friends with people. And he got to make friends with the guide that walked him off the mountain and literally brought him food and water in the hospital for 4 days, because they don't even bring you food and water in hospitals in Tanzania. Like you have to have your family do it. And he had no family around except for me. And I was only 30 kilometers away. I was 30 kilometers and a 2-day walk away from him, because of the mountain.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing. Like, so yeah, I mean, embrace the life that you live and recognize that you can control everything in your life.
Wow. Yeah, that's just really deep.
I don't know. It's the first time I ever said it out loud on a show. So, hopefully it didn't confuse anyone, but that's what I think about all the time. So.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to take this off live. I actually forgot to record it. So how smart of me.
Well, you can download it off of the Facebook group.
Yeah. Well,
I've done it before.